Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Success and Leadership Breakfast. My name's Mark McGowan. I'm the editor at Business News, and I'll be your MC this morning. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their bond to the land and pay respects to their elders, past and present. Our special guest this morning is the Premier of Western Australia, the Honourable Mark McGowan. Please join me in giving the Premier a warm welcome. I'd also like to extend a welcome to our Success and Leadership series host sponsor, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and to our series sponsors, Brian Burke Homes, City of Perth, EY, Meerkats, Velrada, and WA Super. And also a welcome to our new charity partner, the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research. And thanks also to the Hyatt for their support. Please thank our sponsors. This year is very special for Business News. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary. We've seen enormous change over that time in the publishing industry and, of course, in Western Australia. And throughout the year, we'll be looking back at some of the defining stories and events that have shaped Western Australia. And we'll also be reaching out to businesses and organisations that are celebrating milestones this year with us. One important thing that we've been doing over the years are these Success and Leadership breakfasts. They've been running for 16 years, and we've featured the state's political and business leaders over that time. This event marks a great start for 2018, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here this morning. We've got a terrific lineup of speakers for the year ahead, including our next speaker who's with us this morning. Chris Sutherland is Chief Executive of Programmed, a large and diversified business with 20,000 staff across the country. Chris will be speaking here at the Hyatt on Thursday the 3rd of May. Another long-running program is our 40 Under 40 Awards, now in their 17th year. We've recognised over 600 outstanding entrepreneurs under the age of 40, and some of those winners are here in the room this morning. This year's winners will be announced at a gala awards night at Crown on the 7th of March. It's always an inspiring occasion to see so many young high achievers, and there's still opportunities to buy tickets if you'd like to join us. Now, the latest edition of our magazine was on your chairs as you arrived. Also on your tables are copies of our 2018 Book of Lists. Gathering industry data and market intel is a big part of what we do at Business News. The Book of Lists publication on your table gives you a sample of what we do. There's a lot more that you can discover on our website, and I encourage you to go and have a look. If you'd like to see a list of guests here this morning, you can browse to the URL that can be found on the back of your program. Now, later on, if you have a question for the Premier, you can tweet your question or text it in. Details are on the screen and also on the back of your program, and we'll also have a roving microphone if you'd like to stand up and ask a question. Breakfast will be served shortly, at which time business cards will be collected for today's door prizes. We have 2 this morning. The Hyatt has donated 1 night's accommodation in a Hyatt Regency Club King Room plus breakfast for 2. And Black Swan State Theatre Company, their programs are also on your table. They've donated 2 tickets to the opening night of Summer of the 17th Dole. The prize includes 2 tickets, a program and post-show hospitality. Now, I'll be back just before 8 o'clock and we'll wrap up just before 9 o'clock. So in the meantime, please enjoy your breakfast and your company. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed your breakfast. It's now time to get underway with the main part of the morning. I'd like to thank again our host sponsor, Commonwealth Bank, and all of our series sponsors. Today's format, the Premier will be starting with a short speech, and then we'll move into the Q&A format. And leading the discussion will be our politics columnist, Peter Kennedy. So could you please welcome Peter to the stage first? And it's now my pleasure to introduce the Premier. Mark McGowan was born in Newcastle and grew up in rural New South Wales. He moved to Perth in his early 20s to serve in the Navy at HMAS Stirling, and evidently he liked what he saw and he's never looked back. He was elected to State Parliament in 1996, representing the seat of Rockingham, where he lives with his wife and 3 children. He was a minister in the Gallop and Carpenter governments and was elected leader of the Labor Party, State Labor Party in 2012. He was elected Premier in March last year, and we're delighted that he's joined us this morning. Please welcome the Premier to the stage.
Thanks very much, Mark. And can I firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, their elders past and present. Can I also acknowledge all the other distinguished guests. I think my Treasurer, Ben Wyatt, is here this morning. All the councillors from various local governments. Can I especially acknowledge Business News Executive Chairman Elton Swartz and CEO Mark Pownall. Can I acknowledge my interrogator, prosecutor this morning, Peter Kennedy, who will, I'm sure, throw much more difficult questions than I get in question time to me this morning. And can I especially thank everyone here today, in particular for coming, in particular Business News for hosting today's event, and it's really quite a crowd. Business News, of course, is a publication I read intently, and I always go to the most important part of Business News, which is Peter Kennedy's column, which is on the inside back cover, and it's always full of interesting historical analysis, because Peter's memory goes back some distance of politics in Western Australia. I've learnt a lot, considering I wasn't a native-born West Australian, about West Australian political history from Peter and from that publication. Now, I've got a few things to talk about this morning. Firstly, I was told to keep it short because the Q&A is the people want, and obviously I always think that's more interesting anyway. I just want to make one specific policy announcement to you so that you hear it here first. There will be no sex bans under any government I lead. An amazing day of Australian history yesterday. It'll go down in the textbooks, I'm sure. Firstly, can I just say I enjoy my interactions with the business community of Western Australia, and I attend many events. And whilst people obviously have a variety of political views and not necessarily vote for me, I'm very, very happy with the interactions, and it's always positive and constructive. And there's lots of things we can do together. And for instance, last night I made a speech at the farewell of Deirdre Wilmot from the CCI, and talked about some of the great things that Deirdre and the CCI and the government I was formerly a part of, and my current government, have achieved together. So I look forward to that constructive relationship with the business community of Western Australia. I was thinking about it while sitting at the table, and I watched a documentary last Sunday night about Bob Hawke. I was talking about sex bans. Bob Hawke, if they'd been around back then, the Hawke era may never have happened. I was watching this documentary about him, and there's another version, I think, on Sunday night of his time as Prime Minister, as opposed to his time prior to that. And they were my formative years. My formative years at university and high school. I was in year 11 when Bob Hawke became Prime Minister of Australia. And, you know, you talk to young people today, he's just him and Paul Keating are just some guys they've sort of vaguely heard about. But they were my formative years, my formative learning years about political issues. And their model of being bringing the community together, making decisions that tough but necessary, always having an eye on fairness and equality and a sort of broader Australian vision of everyone sharing in our state and nation's success. That's the sort of model I learnt as a young man, going to university, reading the newspapers, watching it all on television. And it was actually probably the reason I joined the Labor Party back in the days when he was Prime Minister, the inspiration that he and Paul Keating provided to me, which they provided to lots of people. So that's, in some ways, the model I'm trying to emulate as Premier of Western Australia, obviously on a much smaller scale, but nevertheless it is an important model to follow. Just a couple of quick facts for you. I think the economy is doing much better than it was. Our employment growth is up. Our number of people employed has climbed by 30,000 over the course of the last 11 months or so. Our domestic economy is out of recession for the first time in 4 years. Our export economy was never in recession, as we know. We're the strongest exporting state in the nation. Around 40% of the nation's exports come out of Western Australia, but our domestic economy had some difficulties. There's a growing sense of optimism and confidence in the domestic economy, particularly a whole range of sectors, but you can feel it in the community, you can see it in the community, you can see it in the jobs growth, and you can see it in the advertising and the like online of the various websites that advertise employment positions. I'm particularly pleased that we've gone from the worst unemployment rate, which is where we were about 18 months ago in the country, now to one of the better rates of, or the lesser rates of unemployment in Western Australia, because one of my priorities is to make sure that we do create opportunities for people for employment. Now, a few things that we're doing before I go and face the questions of Peter. It's been talked about for a long time to diversify the economy, and we're just talking about it on my table. I'm a strong supporter of that, and it was actually the comment was made. Everyone talks about diversifying the economy until commodities take off and everyone rushes back to mining. That's got a bit of truth to it. And obviously during the course of the mining boom, which was an extraordinary period from say 2004 to maybe 2013, 2014, it was an enormous period of economic activity, and a lot of people did well out of it. On the other hand, we missed some opportunities, and I was relaying to the table when the Commonwealth Government was preparing all of the work for an enormous defence spend in Australia. Western Australia was nowhere to be seen, and so we missed out on a lot of the opportunities that existed during that time of the mining boom, because we're so focused on one industry, we didn't think about what else might be out there. And so we're quite determined to make sure that we deal with that constructively as best we can to diversify the state's economy. So you've seen me making a range of announcements recently. The West Australian Jobs Bill, in which we are emulating the Victorian model. The state government itself spends about $30 billion a year. Many billions of that, $6 billion of that is on capital works, and billions more are on procurement. We've got a West Australian Jobs Bill to make sure that we give West Australian business the best opportunity of receiving those contracts and that work, in particular in the regions. So that process is ongoing. The Victorian government has done it. It doesn't breach international free trade agreements and the like, and in any event, some of those don't apply to more to your smaller and medium-sized enterprises in any event. So that process is ongoing currently. I announced a couple of weeks ago Infrastructure WA to overcome some of the problems of the past in respect to the infrastructure spend of the state, so we spend it wisely with a long-term plan. So if you want to invest, you know what the plan is for the state in terms of the state's capital works in the future. That process is ongoing. It's out for consultation currently. I'd welcome your input actually, and it'll be largely private sector led. So that's a important reform we're putting in place currently. We're currently we have our defence strategy in place, which is about securing what we now can of the defence spend the Commonwealth is putting in place largely in South Australia, but there will be a range of either maintenance and or modules and the like that we may be able to secure. And indeed next week, next Wednesday, I'm flying to Washington with the Prime Minister. I'm sure he'll be happy to get out of the country. And we'll be over there, and I'll be meeting with senior officials, in fact the Secretary of the Navy in America, seeking some additional maintenance spend on when they send their ships here, and also to actually encourage them once again to come back to Western Australia. It was once a huge boon for small business in Perth, Fremantle and the like, US ship visits and the like. So we're doing those sorts of things all the time. Last year it was China and Japan about international students and tourism and the like. When it comes to tourism, despite our state's financial position, we are putting in place some significant tourism initiatives and tourism spend to support the tourism industry and some certainty when it comes to that sort of thing. And you saw earlier this week I made some announcements when it came to liquor reforms and freeing up the hospitality environment. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. And there's a whole range of other initiatives in manufacturing and the like to make sure we diversify the state's economy. Now, I'm also the Minister for State Development, so I do have ultimate responsibility in relation to mining, and I've been assiduous in making sure we have a quick and decisive approvals process for the mining industry, which I think has been largely well received, that we have that attitude towards the mining industry in Western Australia, which is, if not, it's not actually the largest employer in the state, but by value we all know it's incredibly important for Western Australia. The other thing that state government has to do is manage its budget effectively. And if there's one thing that keeps me awake at night, it's recurrent spend. Recurrent spend by the state. What occurred was recurrent spend was built in to the state's budget over the course of the last 8 years or so that is difficult to unwind. And if you go to the letters pages every day, you'll find as we try to take out spend that might be duplication, or it might be unnecessary, or it might be things that we can get others to do. We are assaulted and assailed by letters to the editor accusing us of all sorts of things. So it's difficult, and budget management is difficult. We have a pathway back to surplus in 2020, 2021, and debt starts coming down as soon as we hit that. And that's our very, very firm intention to get there. I can't control what happens outside of Australia. I can't control what Donald Trump does on any given day. I can't control China's attitude to Australia, which I think has been made significantly worse by some of the commentary, in particular by Barnaby Joyce. But what we can do is our best to get back to that surplus, and if we get to that surplus, the state's debt levels start coming down. So that's our plan and our intention, and the Treasurer and I are very, very fixed on achieving that outcome. That means very difficult decisions, and as I said, a lot of the spend is built in. And once you build in spend at a government, more so than in a business, it's harder to unwind. Businesses is easier. Governments, we are subject to the election cycle, we are subject to the upper house, we are subject to the assault that comes from, I'll be very kind to journalists, but, saying constantly you've got to unwind spend, and once you do, attacking you for doing so. We're subject to those sorts of things in political life, but we're determined to get the state's finances, the recurrent spend in particular, back under control. Lastly, I think I'll talk about something we all agree on, and that's the subject of alcohol. We announced some important reforms earlier this week in relation to the provision of making sure tourism is front and centre in the provision of liquor licensing. And so that's the first time that's ever happened. We've announced some reforms this week so that if you run a restaurant, a licensed restaurant, you no longer need to seek a permit in order to be able to sell liquor without a meal, and a few other reforms like that. So restaurateurs across the state, I think, will be the big beneficiaries of what we announced. If you're seeking an application, and it might be a bit of an interesting, exotic idea, tourism will be taken into account in the determination. Two good things for the hospitality industry. We're also, and there's a range of other things, you might have heard on the radio this morning, it's not strictly a business issue, but we're actually putting in place some laws to stop sly grogging, whereby people load up a ute or a trailer full of beer or wine and take it out to a remote community, or a community might have alcohol bans, and sell it at exorbitantly profitable rates. The laws we're announcing today in relation to that mean that that's now an offence even to be caught with that alcohol. So if a community is trying to do the right thing to stop alcohol, if people are trying to breach that, they'll be subject to criminal penalty now, which hasn't been the case before. But the other thing is we're going to be freeing up the beer and spirit producers across Western Australia. So all those little breweries we've come to love, and those little spirit producers that are in Albany or in Northbridge or wherever, they're going to now have the opportunity to be able to sell their products just like a winery can at the front gate, and they can sell their products at farmers markets or festivals just like wineries can. And we're also allowing for wineries to sell. Did you know that wineries can't actually sell products from their premises that have been distilled, or whatever the process is for wine, at another premises, so they can't bring it back to their premises to sell. So some of those silly bits of red tape that are in the winery and direct brewers and the boutique brewery business, some of those silly bits of red tape, we're cutting all those away as part of these reforms as well. So if you like going out to a brewery, you like going to a winery, you like going out and having a good time, this will make it a lot easier for you to do so. So that's one of the relatively small but still important things for the hospitality industry that we're doing in Western Australia. Look, thanks so much for coming today. As I said, I was told, very short speech. I think I've infringed that rule. But thank you so much for coming today, and I look forward to Peter's questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Premier. Can I just ask you about the hospitality issue you've just announced then? You, previously in government, you introduced small bars, and now you're freeing up the selling of alcohol. What's inspired you to do this? It's not a problem, of course.
No. Well, when I became a minister back in 2005, I was giving the racing, gaming and liquor portfolio and tourism. And as a young man, my experience of going out was you go to the pub, big pubs, lots of people, and then you go to if you're still standing, you go to a nightclub at like 12 or 1 in the morning, which was terribly expensive. The big pubs were loud and not necessarily conducive to talking. And the nightclubs, you couldn't hear yourself think, and generally a very unfortunate and disappointing experience for me. Anyway, I'm no Barnaby Joyce. So I had some ideas when I became minister that we could transform, and I'd been to America as a backpacker with my brother in the 90s, and all we did was go to little bars and they were fun, and so worked with the agency to say why don't we move in that direction? Why don't we do that sort of thing, like I saw in Chicago, and they came up with some different rules, and today we have 120 small bars across Western Australia.
Well, I think people have voted with their purses, and it's been a great success. Can I just remind you that if you'd like to SMS a question for the Premier, the number's up there, and also if you'd like to tweet, don't hesitate to do that. But Premier, you're almost a quarter of the way through your first term. Has it been harder than you thought?
It can be hard at times, that's true. And when I was first elected, obviously I was just telling the table. I'll just give you the experience. So I did 5 years as opposition leader, which is demanding. And then the first 70 days of last year, because for some crazy reason our elections are sort of midway through March, 70 days of solid campaigning from early in the morning to late at night with range of functions, events, speeches, press conferences, shopping centre walks, having to put all the stuff in your head every day. It's like an exam every day. You come out of that and you're into government and you don't get a break. There's nothing, no break, and government is absolutely full on. So at times, you sort of wish you'd had a month off, but it's not exactly like that. You imagine if you come to government, you say, right, I'm going on holidays for a month now. It doesn't exactly work like that, so it can be quite exhausting. But at Christmas, I had a holiday and drove down, and you'll be pleased to know, took a holiday around Western Australia and drove around the south coast with my wife and kids, and came back very refreshed. What's hard about government is as I said in my speech, you know, you have to make difficult decisions at times. You upset people. There's a barrage of criticism. The people who are on your side, or when you do good things in government, what I've found is when you do good things, when you deliver an election commitment or what have you, that sort of disappears into the ether. But anything difficult you do hangs around and causes you grief for a long period of time. So that's the reality, I think, of government. Yeah, no, it can be exhausting, and I suppose it has been a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be.
You mentioned Bob Hawke was one of your models as far as governing is concerned. Bob Hawke was all about consensus, and you've made reference to that. But you've had some bumps in the first year, particularly in education, and the experience the other day of confronting the Country Women's Association at Parliament House. That must have been quite unique. So how much of that is a problem for you? I mean, the consensus issue, how can you sort of bring people with you?
I got some good scones. I asked Bob about this. I was with him in January. I've met him lots of times, and he's very nice to me. I asked him about this. I said, you know, how did you cope coming to office? You know, he said, well, you know, I did 1 month as opposition leader. I said, well, I did 5 years. I said, well, how was 1 month? That must have been easy. And he used a common Australian expression starting with an F, which I won't say, but he said, 2 F long was 1 month as opposition leader. So I thought he had it easy, but he thought it was too long. Look, yeah, you know, Bob was a consensus leader, but he had to make difficult decisions. I mean, the idea that somehow you don't make difficult decisions. There's various models. I mean, Malcolm Fraser, who was the Prime Minister when I was a kid, you know, he seemed to revel in making difficult decisions and, you know, enjoyed being, you know, hostile and stomping on things and the like. I didn't live in Western Australia, but I think Charles Court had a bit of the same persona. You know, made difficult decisions and seemed to, you know, enjoy it. Whereas I think Bob made difficult decisions, but, you know, tried to explain why he had to do it and what the overall idea and agenda was at the end of difficult decision making.
And what's been your most difficult decision in the first term, in the first year?
Oh, geez. Well, obviously during the budget process, we lost $5 billion from the election to the budget in GST and royalty projections, and since then we've lost another $500 million. So obviously the decision to breach the commitment I made about taxes and have the payroll tax levy for a defined period of 5 years, which will raise us $500 million, was probably the most difficult.
With regard to sort of the first budget, it was suggested that Ben Wyatt's first budget wasn't tough enough. And some of those measures were knocked out, of course, in the upper house. So budget repair, how much progress are you making in budget repair, getting that budget back, reducing the deficit?
Well, in our first budget, we managed to find savings of over $4 billion.
But it's still a big deficit.
Yeah, no, but I'll just explain. We made $4 billion worth of savings. Across the forward estimates, we now have the lowest recurrent growth in spending on record, which is around 1 to 1.5% across the forward estimates. We've got health under control again. Health was growing at 10% per annum. We've got that down to now 1 or 2%. So those sorts of things are pretty significant, and they're tough. For instance, I brought in a new wages policy, and you know, you've seen the police union, some of them, in particular the police union, didn't enjoy it. But the new wages policy is saving us $500 million. So some of those things are tough. I mean, the idea that somehow you can just magically cut huge amounts of spend out, the Commonwealth Government has found that that's not possible, but I think we're doing a better job than the Commonwealth Government on getting our recurrent spend under control. Where
do you stand on the view with regard to the economy and growth in the economy? Where do you stand on the view that rather than wait until or provide tax cuts for the business sector and to sort of stimulate the business sector, that actually wage increases are the way to go to give the economy a kick along? I mean, you've got a very tight public sector wages policy, but there's a view that wages need to be increased to get the economy going. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I'd love to increase wages. I'd love to increase wages in the public sector, but I can't beyond what we've decided to do, because otherwise we'll lose the credit rating we have. So, and that will mean an increase in interest costs and further push up our debt and deficit situation. So I can't do it. In terms of wages generally, I mean, they generally rise or fall in the broader economy based upon the health of the broader economy. So if you've got a healthy broader economy, well, then wages will go up. Obviously, you're seeing the green shoots in mining. We're seeing additional iron ore mines come online. We're seeing lithium mines come online. I suspect there'll be some growth in the broader economy when it comes to wages, just as a consequence of that. Did you raise tax cuts nationally? Yeah, the tax cuts issue that the Commonwealth...
Or at a state level, both.
Well, I'd love to do that too. Look, I just find it all a little bit bizarre, to be honest, that, say, in America, let's take that example, that there's trillions and trillions of dollars of national debt in America and deficits in the, if it's not hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States, and they're just removing revenue. I don't get it. I don't know where this is going to end. The United States doesn't seem to have any sense of responsibility when it comes to, or at least the current president, when it comes to managing that country's finances. So I'm one who thinks you have to have prudent financial management.
I have a question from Greg Holzman, and it's about mining activity and the economy. Mining activity is increasing and a skills shortage is becoming evident. Question says, what is your opinion, Premier? What is your opinion of the federal government training fund levy, which is struck at $7,200 per person, because there is a view that it makes it prohibitive to source overseas skilled labour?
I don't know what the federal government training fund levy is, I'm afraid, but obviously we have, as I said earlier, we have 5.7% unemployment in Western Australia, and we have lots of people looking for jobs. So my main focus is on giving Western Australians job opportunities. So we have a very effective training system. I think it does a very good job, and we want to make sure it continues at its current levels of activity. Unfortunately, what we have seen is the federal government's cut some support out of the training arrangements to the states. So that's another financial problem we have to face.
Just to ask you about your local content policy. You've made it a big feature of creating more jobs with more local content, with government employment and government contracts. But how confident are you that by emphasising the local content policy, the government and therefore taxpayers are going to get value for money from local contracts, local suppliers?
I'm very confident. I look around me and I see some very good business people in this room who do a very good job. I'll give you the classic case, and that was the famous bridge across the river, which was outsourced to Malaysia. And after a couple of years of intensive work, there was a couple of pieces of metal lying in the bottom of a fabrication yard. It's in some obscure shed in Malaysia. We brought that back on shore late last year. When was it? Maybe October last year. And with a local contractor, Sidmec, down in Henderson. They are now working 24 hours a day, and they're going to produce one of the world's best bridges out of that facility in record time. And that's what can be done in Western Australia. What I always find, and I went to I opened the stadium the other day, is when you look at the things that West Australians do, and I participated in the opening of Wheatstone the other week. West Australians can do anything. I mean, if you look at that Wheatstone, I mean, it's extraordinary. If you look at the stadium, it's extraordinary. The idea that we can't do things, I think, is just, the evidence shows that's wrong.
So the idea that perhaps with government contracts work might be done overseas, that under your government is a thing of the past?
No, well, obviously you have to have some competitive pressures in there. But what we have is what's called West Australian Industry Participation Plans and the like, in which we give West Australian contractors the best opportunities to compete.
How do you ensure there are those competitive pressures?
Well, you still have a tender process, but you can either have weightings for West Australian competitors, particularly in regional areas, and you can have, we have all sorts of assistance in the tendering processes, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. And there's a general understanding in the procurement area of government that the West Australian government thinks West Australian businesses should be the beneficiaries of West Australian contracts.
So with regard to government tenders, does that mean the government will always select the lowest tender?
Not always, no.
So if you don't, what do you base the selection on?
Well, as I think lots of businesses here would, you look at quality, price, we'll look at things like the employment practices, like as in the number of people employed and the number of traineeships, all those sorts of things, and apprenticeships, those sorts of things will be considerations.
Just ask you about the GST, because it always seems to come up. And the former Premier Colin Barnett indicated in page 50 of the Business News that the heads could well roll at the next federal election of of local MPs. Liberal and or Labor, heads could roll because of inactivity over the GST. Is that something you agree with?
Yes, I do. I think West Australians are very unhappy with what's occurred. Just so you all understand the current arrangement, we're currently at 34 cents in the dollar. South Australia is at $1.44, Tasmania is at $1.80, the Northern Territory is at $4.50. So for every dollar we put in, we get 34 cents back. They get those amounts back. New South Wales is at 88 cents, so they're a bit below par. They're angry about that. Victoria is at about 95 cents. Queensland's at about $1.18. So we are obviously the jurisdiction that gets the worst treatment. West Australians understand that. They don't understand why. And to be frank with you, I don't understand entirely why it's like that. It seems to me to be a very ill-defined formula, and a formula that punishes us for trying to get things done. So I think my advice to the Prime Minister, and I've said this to him basically every time I see him, is that whoever's in government nationally who doesn't do anything about it will be punished.
And so with regard to state representatives in the federal parliament, Liberal and Labor, how would you rate their performance in representing Western Australia's view, the sort of view that you've just put forward?
Something happens when people fly across the Nullarbor. Look, something happens when they fly from Armidale to Canberra. Anyway,
That's Armidale,
New South Wales.
Yeah, Armidale, New South Wales.
Look, all I'd say is that I think they all understand the issue. They understand the gravity. You know, my federal colleague Bill Shorten has put a $1.6 billion package on the table for Western Australia as part compensation for it to take us to 70 cents on the dollar. I'm waiting to see what the Commonwealth Government does, and I'm waiting to see what both sides do in response to the Productivity Commission inquiry.
Premier, there's another question from the floor. Given the state's debt levels and challenges to return to surplus, would you reconsider the sale of Western Power?
Look, that's not on our agenda. I don't think the people of Western Australia want that. It's
a lot of money.
Yeah, but just so we all understand, Western Power looks after its own debt, and Western Power produces a dividened to the taxpayers. So the idea that it's just some sort of easy thing, I don't think is quite accurate. But I'll just say this: I don't think the West Australian people of Western Australia want it. They certainly didn't vote for that at the last election. And I think whoever goes forward with that policy will not be successful.
All right, but you haven't ruled out some privatisation, have you? And particularly the TAB is on the agenda.
Correct.
And the land titles.
What's called Landgate.
Landgate.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so we're considering both of those currently. The TAB, as we know, is a asset which is subject to national competition now, which is very difficult for it to deal with. And so we're working with the racing industry to work out what the best option is for it. And obviously, if we were to sell it, it would have some proceeds, which we will seek to work out, go back to the racing industry. So that's the process we're going through there.
Now, just a reminder that we'll be taking questions from the floor very shortly, so if you've got a question, please be ready to go and address it to the Premier. We'll have about 10 minutes of questions. There's a question from the floor here, from Andre McIntyre, I think. How do you see arts, creative industries and sport contributing to tourism?
Strongly. All three are things that people want to participate in these days. Last weekend we held a UFC event at the arena, and I didn't attend, but I was told by some people who did that it was quite a spectacle and quite a few hours of entertainment. We had, I think, 4,000 people come in, because we record where they're from in terms of their ticketing and the like. 4,000 people come from interstate or overseas to watch that particular event. So obviously that is a strong driver. Those sorts of events are strong drivers of tourism activity. What we've had historically was a market failure in hotel rooms during the course of the mining boom, when all the capital was sucked to the mining industry, and so we had this extraordinary growth in prices for hotel rooms. And what's happened since the mining boom in, say, 2013, the market failure has been more than overcome by new hotel beds opening and the like, but there has been a reduction in business traffic, so we have to fill that now with tourism in particular. So that's what we're doing our absolute best to do, to make sure that all those hotel rooms now have some tourism, some tourists coming to fill them. Unfortunately, there's a slight legacy issue in places like China and Japan, even over interstate, where there's a feeling that to stay in a hotel in Western Australia is very high priced comparatively, whereas the reality is the prices of hotel beds have gone right down because of the expansion in hotel beds. So we have to get people here, and we're doing our absolute best, including things like UFC, including the events at the stadium, including some of the, the fringe events and the like, to get people along to Western Australia.
Premier, a question on your legislative program. Your proposal for the gold royalty to help with budget repair, that was knocked out in the upper house last year. Now it seems that your proposal for reform in the taxi industry is going to be knocked out in the upper house. What are you going to do about the Legislative Council? Are you just going to let them belch around the ears over the next 3 years, or have you got some idea about some reform to make it more democratic?
That's not easy. Look, at this state election we won 55.5% of the vote, but we didn't get control of the upper house. So it's an issue, and we attempt to work with all sides in the upper house to secure good outcomes. On the gold royalty issue, there's been numerous reports saying gold was under returning to the taxpayers of Western Australia, and currently their profitability is astronomical. And so we tried to recover $14 from every ounce, $14 net from every ounce for the taxpayers of Western Australia. That's all it was. The average profitability per ounce is around $500 to $600. So we tried to get $14 back for the taxpayers, and the upper house knocked that out. When it comes to taxis, obviously we want to deregulate the industry, but we want to have a compensation scheme for people invested under a government guarantee, which I think is fair for small business people. If they knock that out, well then there's no plan B. We don't have any other options for the taxi industry. It'll be very sad.
What about the upper house, though? Are you going to continue to let the upper house do that?
I can't arrest them.
But you can reform it.
Well, this is a classic catch-22. To reform the upper house, I need to get the legislation through the upper house. So unless I arrest them or organise a sort of a junket to somewhere that they all go on, and then we pass the legislation in the dark of the night, it's very difficult. Look, working with them is the best option for us at this point in time. We don't have any other option at this point in time. I would just urge my political opponents, the Liberal Party, for instance, to support small business in the case of the taxi industry, to support us in budget repair in the case of the gold levy. I mean, I think they should show some responsibility, to be honest.
Are there questions from the floor? Happy to take anyone like to sort of indicate that they'd like to throw a question to the Premier. This is one down at the front. This is about one of the few chances you'll get. All right, there's a microphone. Microphone coming from here. The gentleman right in the front here, if you'd stand up. Yeah, all right. If you just say who you are and a direct question to the Premier.
Peter Liedman from the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research. Premier, it's great to hear that the health spend is coming down to 2%. That's wonderful. Just the concept of new knowledge being a really important currency in the 21st century, can I ask you what your views are and where you see the state spend is going to be in innovation, R&D and tech going forward?
Thanks, Peter. When I said health spending's coming down, what I meant was it's not growing as fast as it was. So it was growing at 10% per annum. We've got it across the forward estimates, I think at maybe one. So that's quite an achievement, because health these days is sucking up around 30% of the state budget. When I was elected to Parliament in 1996, it was 21% of the state budget. So you think about that. If in 20 years it's grown another 9%, if it was to keep going at that rate, eventually we wouldn't have schools or roads or anything, because it just would suck up everything. In terms of innovation, the state will do what we can. We have an innovation fund, as you know. I signed the National Health Agreement last week with the Prime Minister. I was the only Labor Premier to sign it. Because I signed that, we now get a cut of the National Health Innovation Fund, which the states that didn't sign don't get. So that's I can't remember, it's $20 million or thereabouts that we get from me signing that agreement. So there's various things we can do to support innovation, in particular health research, and in the longer term we're looking at using the proceeds of the future fund for that purpose. And I'd actually like to see lotteries have some additional, which is independent as you know, but have some additional effort into the science area to support some of our scientists and researchers.
There's a question over here. Yes. Madam, yes.
Thank you. Alison Hales from the Urban Development Institute of Australia. Thank you, Premier, for your talk, and congratulations to you and your government on the very positive start that you've had over the last 10 months or so. My question actually relates to Perth's brand. So during the mining boom for a period of some 10 years or so, we were known as the mining capital of Australia. We had a very clear brand. Now, since that period's finished, we don't seem to have a clear brand or identity with which we can use to attract international visitors, international students, international investment. Clearly, you do have an agenda of diversifying the economy and attracting growth to the state. So my question is, do you think it is worth us developing a new brand and a new message to sell to those that don't already live here?
Thanks, Alison. We are currently going through that process. We will have a state brand that we release, I expect, later this year. And I would see the brand being something that is ubiquitous, so we can use it in tourism, we can use it in agricultural products, we can use it when we sell our state in whatever it might be.
Is it likely to be back on car licence plates?
I hadn't thought of that, but maybe.
Well, we've had the Premier State in one state, and the Garden State in another, the Festival State.
State of excitement.
Home of the America's Cup.
State of excitement.
Yes. Is it likely to happen?
Well, that's if there's revenue in it, no doubt we will.
All right, there's another question. Yes, over here, sir, yes.
Arthur Kyron, City of Canning. Premier, under the previous government, relationships with local government were at a low point. How is your government going to be different? And what role do you want local government to play in growing the state?
Thanks, Arthur. I started my public life as a councillor at the City of Rockingham in May 1994. I got elected as a councillor there and I became Deputy Mayor, so I have a lot of respect actually for the role of local government and local government councillors, because it is it can be a demanding role. I signed what's called a partnership agreement with the West Australian Local Government Association about consultation, and we've adhered to that to have proper consultation on decisions that might impact local government. In terms of local government growing the state, I have a view that we need to have swifter decision-making processes. We have to have a removal of some of the unnecessary red tape, particularly in relation to building and the property industry, and that we have to have a whole range of reforms there which are currently being progressed within government, particularly in relation to building. So that's something I want to work with local government on, but at times, we might have difficulties, but we've got a current reform process being worked out by Evan Jones, and that will impact on local government, but we'll no doubt consult heavily with local government in doing that.
Thanks very much for that question. One last question, Premier. You said you're heading off to the United States next week with Mr Turnbull and some other state premiers. What message will you be giving to the Board of Governors when you speak to them in the United States next week, and what do you hope it will achieve?
Well, I'm going to be making an address to the National Association of Governors of the United States. There's 50 governors of states and there's 5 governors of territories, Puerto Rico and some of the smaller territories. So there's 55 of them there. I expect it will be an interesting experience. As I said to the Prime Minister the other day, I expect that some of the governors will make Bob Katter look entirely sane. It will be a great experience. My message to them will be that Western Australia is a great place to invest. We have a long historic relationship through the US ships in the Second World War in particular. Chevron is here in big capacity, and our biggest overseas investor is the United States, and we want to continue to have a warm and friendly relationship with the United States, including additional US ship visits. So that will be my message. I'll remind them. I've got this in my head. I'm going to remind them of the story of Herbert Hoover, the President of the United States in the 1920s. He spent a few years out in the goldfields as a mining engineer in the early 1900s. He fled the country after meeting a barmaid at the Kalgoorlie Hotel. At a hotel in Kalgoorlie, he left the country in unusual circumstances, and I'll make sure that they're aware we could have Hoovers everywhere around Western Australia. Currently, so that connection is very deep between us, between the United States and Western Australia.
All right, well, I certainly hope the trip goes well. That completes our question and answer session, and thank you very much for your cooperation. I'd now like to call on Jen Evans from Velrada for the vote of thanks. Thanks very much, Jen.
Thank you, Peter. On behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank our Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan, for giving up what must be his most precious commodity, his time, to be the guest speaker this morning. I think even with years of experience, I imagine it must still be just a little bit scary to face potential questions from over 500 of the state's business leaders. I'm not sure what would be more daunting, Parliament or a WA Business News breakfast. I found, as I'm sure the audience did, the discussion on some of the key issues of governing our state most insightful. A couple of points that I personally took away were making tough decisions are necessary. They aren't always popular, but have the strength to make them. The budget was one of those examples. The good news is that the state economic outlook is optimistic and out of recession, which is very good news, I'm sure, for everyone here today. And finally, the Premier mentioned the focus on creating opportunities for employment. One observation I made is that post the investment boom, now could be a good opportunity for innovation and driving that into key industries in Western Australia, leveraging the significant base we have in the energy and resource sectors, taking advantage of our skills and knowledge base in engineering, technology, and particularly the opportunity in large-scale, data-driven innovation and efficiencies, and porting those across other industries. A topic obviously close to my heart, with Verada, an organisation focused on large-scale process and organisation efficiencies and improvements through the use of enterprise technologies. So on that note, I'd like to invite the audience to join me in a round of applause to thank our Premier, Mr McGowan.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks again to Peter Kennedy and to the Premier. We're just about at the end of our proceedings this morning. I'd like to wind up by thanking our host sponsor, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and our series sponsors, Brian Burke Homes, City of Perth, EY, the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research, Meerkats, Velrada, WA Super, and the Hyatt Regency. Time now to draw the door prize, and if you're one of the lucky winners, you can come and see Rosemary after the event. Now, 2 prizes. First one from the Hyatt, 1 night's accommodation in a Regency Club King Room plus breakfast for 2. From the City of Canning, Councillor Yasso Ponathurai. I hope I got that right. Well done. There we go. And second prize from Black Swan State Theatre Company, 2 tickets to the opening night of Summer of the 17th Dole, a bit of classic theatre, 2 tickets, a program and post-show hospitality. Paula Rogers from Cedar. Well done. So thanks again for joining us. As you leave, please leave your name tags on your tables or at the desk in reception. I hope to see many of you at our future Success and Leadership breakfasts or the 40 Under 40 Awards night. Thank you and have a good day.